Well, without a doubt, the government's first budget will be top of mind for the next 2 weeks here in Ottawa. And if the budget does not pass, well, that would trigger another election, something the government House leader says is a real possibility. Take a listen right now to Stephen McKinnon.
Look, we do not think an election is necessary. We have a minority parliament, but we do believe we have a mandate along the lines of my previous answer. If there has to be an election, we will confidently take our plan to the people. But we don't think an election is necessary.
And you can win one?
And as I said yesterday, the opposition parties are, in my view, being very, very cavalier about the country's.
Okay, so the government House leader uses the word cavalier, but is there any incentive for any party to pull the plug on this parliament? To talk about this, we're now joined by polls analyst Éric Grenier, the founder and the writer of The Writ. Hello, Eric.
Hi.
So listen, and I don't have to say this to you, but any party that wants to vote this government down, they would have to have this feeling that they could gain more seats in another vote. So I wonder what the polls are telling you, because you did ask us to prepare two results in particular. I'm going to ask the control room to call it up right now. So there you have it, Léger to the left, Abacus to the right. Walk us through these polls, Eric, and what they're telling you.
Yeah, these are seat projections based on polls that we've seen recently from Abacus Data and Léger. And I do think that these two sets of polls actually do tell the story, the two kinds of narratives we're seeing from the polls. Abacus had the poll out just a few days ago, had the Conservatives at 41%, the Liberals at 40%, and the NDP at 8%. Léger had a poll a few weeks before that, had the Liberals with a 6-point lead over the Conservatives. And that is pretty much the kind of numbers we've seen from polls over the last 2 months, either a neck-and-neck race between the Liberals and the Conservatives, or either a small lead for the Liberals. In the case of the small lead for the Liberals, you get a majority government, like those seat projection shows, where the Liberals could get the majority that they were missing out on election night. And with the very close race, the kind of numbers that we've seen, especially at the regional level, really suggest it would be 50-50. The seat projection I had there had 150 seats apiece for the Liberals and the Conservatives. In all likelihood, one of them would end up with one or two more seats than the other. But it does show that there are two different scenarios that are being played out here, I think, in a lot of parties' minds. One is, could the Liberals get a majority? And the other is, could it end up being as much as a toss-up election between the Conservatives and the Liberals?
Yeah, so two possible narratives. Nothing really guaranteed if, for example, the Conservatives want to pull the plug. But I also do wonder here, Eric, because the Conservative leader has been on the defensive this week. He's been asked questions about that interview he gave, that Pierre Poilievre gave, in which he described the RCMP leadership as despicable, and he accused the RCMP of covering up for Justin Trudeau. Is there any way of knowing if those comments and the fallout from it will affect the numbers that you've been looking at?
Well, I think that it's not going to impact his ability to pass the leadership review in January. Every indication is that Conservative voters, and we can expect that as well if party members, are very pleased with Pierre Poilievre. But will it have a broader impact on the support for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives? We've seen lots of criticisms about how statements like this don't seem to put him as a PM in waiting. They're not the kind of things that are going to appeal to those swing voters that the Conservatives need to win the next election. So we'll be watching to see over the next little while if some of the discontent we've heard over the last little while is going to impact his polling numbers, and that indirectly could end up impacting his leadership if there is more concern within the Conservative Party, whether or not they like him, whether they think he can actually win the next election.
Yeah, and that is, of course, becomes part of the calculus that Conservatives would have to consider whether or not they wanted to vote down this government. Let's also talk about the Bloc Québécois, though, because yes, the Conservatives are the official opposition, but for the Liberals, they need Quebec. It's their path to government. And we've heard from Yves-François Blanchet, he has already said that he's going to vote against the budget even before seeing it. So when you look at the same two polls, is there any motivation for the BQ to pull the plug on this parliament?
Well, yes and no. They had 22 seats in the last election, and with the kind of numbers we've seen, the Bloc is up a little bit in Quebec, the Liberals are down a little bit. They could expect to win 30, 31 seats, maybe replicate the results from the 2019 and 2021 elections. But in one of those scenarios, they hold the balance of power. In the other of those scenarios, they just have a few more seats with a Liberal majority government. And I think that is one of the things that the Bloc has to take into consideration. What can they get out of the government right now? Because if there is an election, yeah, the Bloc might be able to win a few more seats. Doesn't necessarily mean that they would have any more influence in a parliament after that. So that is a choice they're going to have to make. Also a big choice, there is a provincial election in Quebec next year. So if the Bloc doesn't go in 2025, could they go in 2026? Because I think that they would want to make sure they're not getting in the way of the Parti québécois winning that election next year.
And talk to us a bit about the NDP, because, anecdotally, I'll tell you, I've spoken to some New Democrats here in Ottawa. They talk about the borrowed vote that essentially delivered a victory to the Cardi Liberals, and they believe that those votes would come back to the NDP if an election were held. Can you say anything about that?
Well, that is certainly something that could happen, but we haven't seen it happen in the polls. There have been a couple surveys now and then that'll have the NDP at 12%, something like that, but most of them still show them in the low single or the mid single digits, I should say. So there is the chance that if there wasn't another election, they could get the 12 seats that they need for official party status in the House of Commons. There's also a chance that they end up with the same number of seats or even fewer. And the NDP really can't afford another bad election, another election where they have to spend resources on a campaign where they don't get a lot of the reimbursements back. So it's possible the NDP could find themselves with 12, 15 seats in a new election. But again, could the party afford another catastrophe like the last election? And just like the Bloc, could they end up losing the balance of power that they currently have?
Okay, so then when you hear the government House leader expressing concerns about getting this budget passed, how real, again, based on the numbers you're looking at, how real is that concern right now, Éric?
It must be real enough, because we see that Mark Carney has met with a couple of the leaders today. He's making that speech. There's clearly a concern that the budget might not get passed, or that they need to make sure that they have the parties on board to at least abstain. One of them could abstain and also avoid an election. But at the same time, there's not really a lot of incentive for anybody to go to the polls. Is there a chance that any of those parties could end up in a better position? Yes. Is there a chance that they could end up in a worse position? Yes. And it's really 50-50. So we're not in a scenario like in the fall of 2024, where there was a huge incentive for the Conservatives, for the Bloc to go to a campaign because of how weak the Liberals were. Right now, Liberals could get a majority. They could get defeated. The Conservatives could win an election. They could end up in the exact same position they are right now. So when you look at those kind of calculations, not a lot of incentives for parties to go to the polls now. Maybe there'll be incentives to go later.
Okay, maybe as soon as next week. Who knows? We'll bug you again. Éric Grenier, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael.